Welcome to Changemaker Q&A. We have a brand new look for Changemaker Q&A, a brand new direction, a brand new vibe, but it's basically still me, Tiana J, the founder of the Humanitarian Changemakers Network, answering all of your questions about social change and making the world a better place. And I'm super excited to be back into it. I've kind of had this idea for the direction that we're going to take the podcast, but I've been so busy with my PhD and living in India that I just haven't really had a chance to get into it. But now I'm ready to get into it. Now, direction for the podcast that we're going to go is a little bit deeper. We're going a little bit more philosophical, which as a philosophy graduate is something that I'm super excited about. I've come to realize from my PhD research that one of the most powerful things that we have for change is our ideas. And this is something that I want to explore a little bit more throughout this podcast. And I really kind of think that this quote I came across while I was reading something recently. I was reading a book called The Pulse of Freedom by Roy Bhaskar, who is a critical realist, was a critical realist philosopher. And it's a quote that kind of just stuck out in the midst of a huge body of text. And it was sort of one of those aha moments, not necessarily for my research itself, but just more so with the way that I conceptualize the role of philosophy in social change and making the world a better place. And the way I've come to conceptualize social change and the goal of social change has kind of differed a little bit, or maybe I've just been able to kind of put it a little bit more eloquently now. But I would say that this idea of peace, which is something I'm sure, peace invokes a feeling, it invokes a vision amongst all of us. And I really think that the point of social change, the point of humanitarian work, the point of this stuff that we're doing as activists or advocates or policymakers, whatever it might be, the goal is to really create a more peaceful society. And the thing about peace is that it's just as much a process and a way of bringing about change as it is the actual outcome of what we're trying to do. So that's kind of how I've come to conceptualize, I guess, the goal of what we're doing as change makers. And this has been really heavily influenced by Gandhi. I've been reading a lot of Gandhi's work since I've been here in India, and then also people that he influenced, like Martin Luther King Jr. I've always been kind of a big fan of Kingian nonviolence as a method of creating change. And now I just kind of see peace as not something that is a part of social change. I think there's always kind of been within the social change space, the peace movement has always kind of been seen as a part of it. But now I think I'm beginning to recognize that the ultimate goal of the work that we do is to create peace amongst humanity, amongst the planet, amongst the natural world, within ourselves as well. And, I think bridging kind of this micro or interpersonal idea of inner peace with peace for humanity as a whole, and recognizing that actually they're not two separate things, the two are very much intertwined, has been a big part of my realization that peace really is the ultimate goal of social change. And this quote that stuck out to me recently when I was reading some of Bhaskar's work was, "Philosophy is not a question of whether, but which." And that was really powerful when I read it, because as someone who studied philosophy and loves kind of reading all of these different ideas and ways of conceptualizing phenomena and the world and the human experience, it was kind of like a very obvious aha moment for me, because particularly like if we talk about things like normative ethics. I've always been really interested in moral philosophy and kind of whether I'm more of a consequentialist or utilitarian compared to a deontologist. So whether I think that an action is inherently right or wrong, regardless of its consequences. So that's a deontological view, compared to a consequentialist view, which is where we judge the moral value in something by the outcomes that it produces. And if we take a utilitarian form of consequentialism, that would be creating the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And I've always been fascinated by moral philosophy, but I've always felt like I never really fit into either of those camps. And something that this kind of quote really helped me realize, that actually it's not about whether I am or we should be consequentialist, or whether I am or we should be more deontological. It's really a question of which one of these is best in this particular situation. And to kind of go a little bit deeper and a little bit more philosophical, but I will avoid using very philosophical terms, I think this is really going to help set up some of the future discussions that I want to have on the podcast, all about creating change. So, reality and our understanding of the world and what exists ontologically, to use the philosophical term. So ontology is really all about what is considered real in reality, what things we believe exist. And ontology is something that has always really been kind of overlooked in particularly in research, which is why I have taken a very ontologically deep approach to my research. The focus has always kind of been on what we call epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowledge, and what we consider knowledge to entail, how we find out knowledge, what we consider to be true, and all of these questions related to knowledge. That's always kind of been the focus. And I think something that I've realized through the work of philosophers like Roy Bhaskar is that our understanding of the world, or what we consider to be real in the world and what actually exists, can't be reduced to our knowledge of it. I think it's common sense that we can all assume that there is some kind of ontological truth. There is some kind of reality that actually exists. There is a real reality that exists. But our knowledge of that is sometimes not right. And so we need to stop reducing what we consider to be true, for example, to what we know. So we can just think about how our knowledge of different things changes over time, right? Throughout history, science and scientific discovery has helped us realize so many different things. The world is not actually flat. Gravity exists. We actually shouldn't be smoking because it's not actually good for our health. All of these things that were once considered to be true are no longer true, and something else is what we consider true. But when we think about it, the truth has always been the truth. The truth itself doesn't change. It's only our knowledge of the truth that changes. And I think once we can accept that, and once we come to terms with that and become comfortable with this idea that there is our knowledge of reality, and then there is actual reality, like what is actually real, and there can be discrepancies there. I think it gives us permission as humans, as researchers, as change makers, whatever it might be. It kind of gives us permission to realize that knowledge and empirical evidence and all of these things aren't the be all and end all. They aren't reality. They are our entry point to reality. We use our knowledge of the world, and we can kind of use it in a way that allows us to dig a little bit deeper to what might be a more real truth. And this is I think, very liberating. As a researcher, particularly, I've found that, recognizing that I'm doing all of these interviews, I'm looking at qualitative and quantitative data, but realizing that actually this isn't reality itself. These are just different ways of understanding reality. And we can use different types of knowledge. We can use knowledge from different people. We can combine qualitative and quantitative knowledge. We can combine facts and figures with personal stories. We can combine micro level information with more macro level information. And it's by bringing all of these different types of knowledge together that we can, I guess, tell a better story of what reality is and what the world is like. And I don't know if this is going to like hit you like it hit me, but that just, for me, realizing that that's the point of human knowledge and our pursuit of human knowledge is to help us both as individuals and as a collective just tell a better story about reality, about the world, about the human experience. And where I think philosophy can really kind of come into this is once we've kind of got our knowledge of the world, we're beginning to paint a picture. We need to be able to make sense of this. And philosophy is the thing that helps us make sense of it. It's kind of like the underlaborer that gives meaning to the story that we tell. And whether a particular philosophical view or whether a particular view in general is going to be the best one, I think is going to depend on which is going to help us best create peace in the world. If peace is our goal as change makers, the question we need to then be asking, and philosophy itself is this question we're asking, and it's not a question of whether it is definitively one or the other, but which of these is going to best bring us towards a more peaceful world. And I used the example before of consequentialism and deontology. So for example, if we're, faced with some kind of moral dilemma and we've got all of our knowledge that we have on this topic that we bring together, recognizing that our knowledge isn't actually reality. Our knowledge is just the best story that we're able to tell about reality. We can say which of these is going to best bring us to a more peaceful outcome. And so in some situations, because of the information that we have, we might be able to, calculate and quantify that actually this option is going to create a really, 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 really high net good. So we might go with the consequentialism. Or we might say, look, we don't actually have enough information to be able to quantify what the outcomes might be. So we should take a more deontological approach, and we should make sure that the process and the approach that we're taking is one that is not going to cause any harm. Another example, I think, might be, and this is one that I think maybe might be a little bit hard for some people to swallow, but it's something that I've personally found very liberating. And it's this idea that if we are trying to create a more peaceful world, and, we've combined our knowledge, we've painted this picture as best we could of the reality of this situation, and we've, this is out to the best of our knowledge what's happening. There could be stuff that we don't know happening, but we've got this picture painted, and we want to create a better world. We want to create peace as our ultimate goal. Sometimes we might need to take a more progressive or leftist approach. Other times, we might need to take a more conservative or right-wing approach. And recognizing that it's more important for us to be able to look at these things with a little bit more, I don't want to say objectivity, because this idea, I don't think that objectivity is really a thing, because like I said, there is an objective reality, but our knowledge of it is always going to be subjective. And I think just recognizing that when we take a step back and we say, okay, what is the goal? The goal is to create peace. The goal is to create a better world for everyone. Which approach is going to take us there? It's not about whether I personally identify with the left or the right. It's about which of these is going to best help us get towards our goal of peace. And so that's just something to think about. And I think I might kind of wrap things up here, because I think that I've said a lot of things that could be quite deep for some people. But that's something that I really think we should be thinking about as change makers, and recognizing that actually our job, if our job is to, as we say, create a better world, we want to create peace, we need to step away from things like labeling ourselves as left or right, labeling ourselves and identifying with, consequentialism or deontology, or, being a humanitarian or an environmentalist, or all of these different things, and recognizing that we need to be better at taking the best ideas and using them to reach our goal. And so it's not a question of whether we're one or the other. It's a question of which is best going to get us towards our goal. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that gave you a little bit of food for thought. If you guys have any questions, definitely leave them in the comments of the video or the description of the podcast. You'll find a link to ask any questions. I'm really looking forward to answering questions about social change related topics, but with a kind of deeper and more philosophical lens.